I know how to do it.
Welcome to Shifting from Grudge to Grit, Grace, and Gratitude. We have an extraordinary guest on today. Before I introduce her, I just want to mention Jamila will be joining us, albeit a little bit late. But let's go over to Lakeisha Barron Brown and I'll share a little bit about who she is and her incredible story that I got goosebumps just reading her bio and I can't wait. This was one of the interviews I couldn't wait to have today. So,
Thank you.
without further ado, I'm just going to read her profile to you whilst we're waiting for my amazing co host. So, okay, so I need to, yeah. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about rising through loss, overcoming grief as a single mom. It's all about grief, resilience, and strength today. And so here's a bit about Lakeisha Brown, Baron Brown. She's a mother, a grandmother, an author, a life coach, a podcast host, a motivational speaker, and an entrepreneur. Her journey is one of resilience and perseverance. I need to press the go live I see on my Instagram, so just bear with me. Um, yeah, perseverance and resilience shaped by profound loss and adversity. By the age of 8, she had already endured the unimaginable, the murder of both of her parents, leaving her to navigate life as a child, trying to make sense. And here we've got Jamila on, trying to make sense of her world. Despite her hardships, Lakeisha believed she had found happiness only to face further challenges, including becoming a divorced single mother. In 2021, she experienced yet another devastating loss, this time as a grieving mother. Through every trial and tribulation, she has refused to let her circumstances define her. Instead, she uses her voice and her story to inspire others, demonstrating that even in the darkest moments, there is strength to be found. Lakeisha's determination in ambition. Now, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I'm sure Lakeisha's going to inform us soon, has been the foundation of her perseverance, guiding her as she empowers others to overcome obstacles and embrace their own paths to healing. Welcome, Jamila. Welcome, Lakeisha.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Very,
Hi,
very
Lisa. Hello, Keisha.
Hello.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to meet you. Sorry about the noise in the background. Had a late meeting,
No
so I just
problem. Nice to
left
meet you.
just where I was.
Remember what we said earlier, Lakeisha, we just show up as we are. We at least we show up hair
Yes.
not done or hair perfectly done or makeup on or no makeup on or crying or emotional, feeling low, whatever it is, we show up. So
I
I'm just
always say
grateful.
showing up for your authentic self is what I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's why we host the segment. Jamila, it's always good to have you here with the noise in the background. Your presence is always valued, and you know your contributions are always valued. We are live on Instagram, YouTube, as well as LinkedIn. And I mean, we really just going to get into it because this is your platform today, even though you're a podcast host. We want to hear more about your hero journey stories, not stories that is just so incredible to listen. To read it, I said, Jamila, it was awe-inspiring. I was like, wow, I got goosebumps. So I can't wait to hear her testimony. And you can start wherever you want to start from, Lakeisha.
Yes. So first, let me say thank you all for allowing me here in your space to be able to share not just my story, but the story of others. And the reason I say the story of others is because the life of other people have been an impact on my life to get me to where I am today. And so where do I go with that? I go with that with starting with my parents. You know, I have to give them honor. I have to give them an opportunity for you all to know who they were in my life. So, as many may have heard my story, many have not as well. And so, I would start with stating that I was brought up in an environment that already put me in a situation where I had to understand what did it mean to deal with trials and tribulations. And the reason for that is because at a very young age, I unfortunately had lost both parents. You know, I had lost my father when I was 3. I had lost my mother when I was 8. And I don't use the word loss very lightly. My parents were murdered. And, you know, to have to endure that as a young kid and really not understand what does it mean to grow up without parents was tough, right? It was tough to know that even though my parents lived a life that was still pretty trying for me. I mean, I watched my mother regularly use drugs. So at a very young child, I was exposed to things that kids should have not been exposed to. I was taken into environments that young children should not have to be exposed to. But as I don't hold any anger, any frustration about that, I'm very thankful for that. And the reason for that is because it allowed me to be who I am today, right? It allowed me to see that even though someone else's life was not in the best for them, it gave me the strength to know that I wanted more. It gave me the strength to know that I wanted better. And so what I just shared, and I just only shared a small piece, was that was the life of my parents. That was my parents' story. But what do I know about that? What I know about that is that other people's stories can have an impact later in your life. What they cannot provide or what they did their best at providing can ultimately show up later in your life. And so now I'll sort of talk about how their story showed up later in my life. I was angry. I was sad. I was hurt. I fought on a regular basis. So my hurt ultimately caused hurt for somebody else because the old saying goes, hurt people hurt people. So when anniversary dates came up of the past of my mother, best believe I was trying to find somebody who I can fight because I didn't know how to get this energy out of my body other than doing that. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know how to talk about it because unfortunately, nobody was equipped to talk about it. It's not because they didn't want to, it's because it caused pain for them as well. But as a young child, I didn't understand that. All I knew was I was in a selfish place of my life that I needed somebody to understand that there was this hurt little girl who just needed help. I'm going to say to you all, rarely do I get emotional when I talk about this story, but it hurts because I know that I've hurt other people along the way because of my actions and because of my pain. So as I continue to grow and evolve into this person, I had children. And I want to believe that I did the best I can do with raising my children based upon the love and care that I was provided by my aunt who raised me, who many know here in the community, also then became my mother. My siblings, you know, I had all the love that one can have. I had all the support that one can have. But what I didn't have was the understanding of what it was like to be a mom raising a daughter. I didn't understand that. And so when I talk about someone else's story having an impact on my life, I must say that there was times that I will openly say I failed at giving my daughter the emotional support that she needed because I did not understand what it was like to have a mom and to be a mom and to give back to a daughter. And so I'll just stop there with a small piece of who I am, and I will yield over to you all to move me forward in my story.
I'm going into a bit of a cough fit, so I'm going to hand over to Jamila.
Again, I apologize for the background noise, but rather than not being on at all, I thought let me just set up here. But what an incredible story, and what a brave story it is indeed. And Anissa, you know, I'm so like I've been thinking of you while I'm listening to Keisha's story, especially when it comes to, you know, um, the inability of certain people to show affection, and the effect that it has on us. And Anissa, I think, you know, you resonate with it, but I mean, I resonate with it as well. And although mine is from a different perspective, I think my mom went through such a hard life. And as a result, she herself she was warm and loving and caring and all the rest of it, but not affectionate at all. And so it was very difficult for me as a child to accept that. And I can imagine how it must have been for you, having lost your parents, both your parents at that, at the age of 4. Um, I lost my mom at the age of 17, and it was hard enough for me. But even having her there, it was difficult, especially when you have a parent who is not affectionate. And it has a huge impact on you. Fortunately for me, my dad was the complete opposite, and he was very, very affectionate. So I was very fortunate in that sense. So I can really relate to you, and I can really applaud you, I think, for your journey and how you've turned out as a mom and as an adult, having to go through your whole life without the presence of your biological mother. Anissa, I think you would share similar or resonate
Yeah.
similarly with that, right?
Yeah. So, Lakeisha, there are many parallels. Your audio, we can't seem to hear your audio. Are you back?
Okay, sorry. Yes, I am. For some reason, I just couldn't hear you. I do apologize.
Oh, okay. So you can hear us now?
I can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. I just want to say that not only is she a mother, she's also a grandmother now.
Yes.
And before we came live, just a few 10 minutes before, and I know she's going to lead into the story, but I suppose when we don't know how to be the moms, we have a second chance to be the best grandmothers that we can be. So I just want to mention to you that there are many parallels with your story. And yes, Jamila is probably referencing parts of that, being raised in an environment that's rife with drugs, and I'm a product of prostitution. And there's so many of those things that, you don't understand as this young girl. And so we don't know how to be demonstrative and show affection and be nurturing. And it's very difficult to give ourselves grace in the moments and know that we did the best that we could in those periods of time when we were unconscious, when we were unaware, and we didn't have the unconscious conscious to us. But our kids are also the gifts for us in those moments. So I'm not going to talk too much because I had a little bit of insight into more of the story, and I really just want to give you the space. And I want to recognize the fact that you still get emotional. It means that you're still willing to, understand the work doesn't end, that we continuously strive to learn, to grow, to evolve, and that we will be triggered. And there are moments where we will judge ourselves, but it's when we can bring ourselves back and give ourselves grace in those moments. So I do want you to carry on with your story because it is so powerfully profound. And I think a lot of people would want to hear more from you than, I suppose, me and Jamila today.
That's fine. So, Anissa, you are correct when you talk about, grief and how it can show up in any given moment, right? It's not something that we prepare for. It's just something that happens. And so what I often say, even for myself, is that I understand that I understand that grief and healing can coexist. And so as I continue on with my story of grief and healing, I'll dive a little bit more into who I am. So as I mentioned, losing parents and the impact that it had upon my childhood life, on my adolescent life, and on my parent life, me being a parent, there's some gaps in there that I did not openly talk about. And that was, what was it like to be a mom and to raise children by yourself? And it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't easy because, your kids look at you sometimes as a superhero, and they want you to have all the answers. They want you to be able to do everything for them, but not understanding that sometimes you fall short, and that sometimes you may be critical upon yourself because you do the best that you can to hide all the pain that you may go through, or all the challenges that you may be facing along the way, whether it's just as simple as putting a meal on the table, or whether it's as simple as making sure they eat, and they say, "Mommy, are you hungry too?" As you may be hungry, you may just not have the finances to make sure that you eat too, And so as we talk about grit, as we talk about grudge, as we talk about grace, it's going through those trials and tribulations at times and not really having all the answers, but doing the best that you can to show up. And so as life began to evolve for me as being a single mother, I had the opportunity to have my high school sweetheart re-enter my life. And he came back into my life in the early 2000s. I'll just leave it there. But when he came in with an understanding that I had a lot of trauma. He came in with the understanding that I had two children who desired a male figure in their life. As they had their father in the community, they didn't have him the way that they needed him to be. No slap in his face. He was doing the best that he could do, but it wasn't what my kids needed at that point. And so thankfully, my significant other, I reference him now as my significant other, and I'll go more into that as we continue on with the episode. But he came into my children's life, and he was very gracious, and he was very patient with my children as they were very hesitant to accept him, understandably so. But over time of consistency, he showed them that he was there for not just me, but he was there for them. And so it allowed the bond, it allowed the trust for them to say, okay, we have someone here that's a steady figure in our life that's not going to go anywhere. And with that, we were able to also then bring another child into our life, into our family, which is my younger son that he and I birthed together. So now we have 3 children in a home alongside of my stepchildren who are his biological children. So now our family has evolved to 5 kids in the home, give or take, at any given moment. Well, what we were not prepared for was that as our children began to graduate high school and they go off to college, obviously our family is beginning to shrink inside the home, right? So at this point in 2018, it was just myself, it was my significant other, and it was my younger son at that time at 9 years old. So as we were prepared for the shift to occur because people were evolving in their life, and that be our children, educationally, we were not prepared for a figure to leave our home and leave our home empty. And that was my significant other on December 31st. As many are getting prepared, for all the things of New Year's Eve and receiving all these happy New Years because the New Year is coming. We were not prepared I was not prepared, let me say initially, because I was the one that initially realized that my life was shifting immediately. I was not prepared to walk in my basement and find my significant other deceased on the floor. So as everyone else was ready and prepared for the new year, my New Year's was changing. My life was changing. Once again, I was faced with another death that I didn't think I was going to have to endure again. I was faced with having to tell my children that someone who they at times was hesitant to accept in their life, someone who became I always say that he was my daughter's listening ear. He was my daughter's confidant. It was very tough for me to have to tell my children. One child was actually my older son was here, honestly, at the home when this happened. He heard his mother screaming. He didn't know why. It was very tough for me to walk up to the top of my stairs to tell him that his dad, should I say, was deceased. What was even more tough was to tell my 9-year-old son, because he was not here, that his father was deceased, because he and his father were inseparable. I don't know, what TV episodes you all get there where you live, but there was an episode that used to come on here in West Virginia called Sanford and Son. Well, I guess in the United States called Sanford and Son. That's who my younger son and his father were. When you saw one, you saw the other. In this truck, they were always riding down the street. So I just wasn't prepared to have to tell my children that someone who they loved so deeply had left and was not coming back. And so that obviously was a big shift in our life. It was a big shift in my life because once again, I was faced with another death. But it wasn't just that. I was now looking at myself as a young kid who had lost a parent and who had lost both parents, to now looking at my 9-year-old son who had now faced a death as a young child. So it was almost like a deja vu, if that makes sense, of I always internally used to worry about if I would die when my children were 9 or when they were 8, because I didn't want them to have to face what I had to face. But ultimately, I still had to face it because I had to now look at my 9-year-old son who doesn't have a parent. So that wasn't easy in any capacity, and it hasn't been easy in any capacity. And so I knew what was important to give to him because it wasn't given to me. I knew that it was important to immediately get him into counseling, to be able to talk about his feelings, to be able to know that he may not have been able to come to mom because mom was grieving as well. So I wanted him to have a safe space of someone who didn't have emotions tied to him, to where he can be his authentic self and truly give his story, his emotions, his hurt, his pain to someone else to allow him to navigate that space. So time continued to move on. Grief continued to set in. I worked on collectively as a family, us figuring out how do we heal through this? How do we work through this? But what I saw was my 18-year-old son, who was here at the home when I learned of the passing of my significant other. I saw my 18-year-old son shift drastically. I saw his behaviors go back to that little young boy who was desiring for a man to be in his life, who was wanting a father to be in his life. I watched this 18-year-old young man self-sabotage because he had finally gained someone's trust in him to know that he wasn't a bad person, or that he was going to make some mistakes along the way, but no one was going to run out of his life. And so to lose his stepfather, to lose his dad, because that's what he eventually called him, it was hard as a mother to see my son in pain. That even as a mother, when, mother and sons normally have a strong bond and they normally have a strong connection, but there was nothing that I was able to provide for my son at that time, because what he wanted was a man in his life, and I couldn't provide that for him at that stage of his life. And so as time went on, 2021, my then 20-year-old son, who I'm referencing, became ill. He began to encounter some health issues that was very uncommon for our family. Thankfully, we don't really have much illness in our family, definitely for young people. And so my son began exhibiting headaches. He began exhibiting vision issues with his vision. And so I'm just thinking he's just stressed because of life. I'm just thinking he's stressed because of the things that
Anissa,
so of course, as a mother, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Keisha, we lost
So
you
of
there
course,
for a bit. I was just not sure if it was just me. Anissa, did you lose Keisha as well?
can you all hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly where you lost me at. Do you mind sharing at what point you last heard me speaking?
I think just start
From
back
the time.
the
Sorry.
time that that he started having the issues with the vision. And
Okay.
health issues.
The health risk, the health
Yeah.
being presented with health issues. That's where you
Yes.
lost.
So, okay, I do apologize. So in January of 2021, my son began to encounter some health issues, starting out with headaches regularly, vision issues with his vision. And so, of course, as I stated, if everyone heard that, it was uncommon for us and uncommon for him truly, because he had never faced any type of health issues before. So we were also faced with the pandemic at that time. And so that too presented some issues for us. And so we understood the importance of going to the hospital to find out what was going on. The challenge lied that I took him later in the evening to the ER. I could not go in to the ER with him, so he had to go in by himself. So he walked into the ER as a scared young man, for me to later get a call to say that there were some test issues, there were some tests that had been ran, and they had some concern with some of his levels. And one of the levels they had concern with was his kidney levels. So I was at home awaiting the next day to where I could go into the hospital to see him, to have a battery of tests ran, to be in the hospital with unanswered questions while they await the results. For us to know that, to learn that, okay, we're going to treat him right now for high blood pressure, but there's a possibility that we need to determine if it's high blood pressure or if it's kidneys, because they both work together. A week after being discharged from the hospital, to learn that my son was in stage 4 kidney disease. So that was tough. It was tough because, again, here he is trying to navigate life. Here he is as a new father. Here he is as a scared young man. And as I do my research, understanding that possibly what could happen from here. What I, again, was not prepared for was on Mother's Day to find out that my son had to be hospitalized again because he now was at stage 5 kidney disease. He was in renal failure. So we only had months to prepare from stage 4 to stage 5. So now, as a mother, as I always did, I had to find a way to put on this face that I was going to try to be this superhero and give him the support that he needed, but also assure him that we had to take the necessary steps to try to save his life, because he had a 1-year-old kid who needed him because he needed a father. So there we were. We were in a situation where my son had to decide, do I go on dialysis? And I'm sure, and I'm speaking from a mother, that had to be tough as a young man to make those drastic decisions of, do I go on dialysis? Do I shift my life and maybe be different from the rest of my peers, right? But also as a mother, to still be there to support this young man and to give him the advice that I felt he needed, because I needed my son. I wanted my son to remain passed away from kidney failure and other effects of the pandemic. I lost my son. So within a matter of less than 3 years, I lost two more important people in my life, that being my significant other and that being my son. I must say that was one of the hardest deaths that I've ever had to endure. But I'm here. I'm here because I want people to understand that as I am emotionally showing my signs of grief, I'm here because I'm healing. I'm here because I will continue to heal and I will continue to grieve the loss of all that have come in my life, whether it's been by death, whether it's been by divorce, whether it's been by, losing friends along the way, because we know that happens during grief, because people don't know how to show up for you when you're in these very authentic, raw moments. But what does that mean? What does it look like for Keisha through healing? What this has allowed me to do is, shortly after losing my son, I remember being on a text message thread with, I'm going to now use quotation marks, as friends, because I don't know where they are at this moment. I don't know if they're watching this video at this moment. But I remember saying to them, I'm at a point in my life where I feel like running and not turning back. And I remember reading the message, and it was said to me, there's no more we can do for you. You probably need to go seek counseling at this moment, because I was at the lowest point of my life. And as I'm a therapist myself, I said, I'm not going to do that. I said that to myself. I said, there's something else I'm going to do. And what I decided to do was to bravely sit in front of my fireplace and begin to write my story. I began to write my story of my childhood trauma. I began to talk about what it was like while I grew up from losing both parents. And so I was able to become an author and write my book through the eyes of a cracked soul. And it allowed me to begin to heal from my hurt child. It allowed me to begin to understand where I didn't show up at times for my children, not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't. It allowed me to understand what it was like to not be able to show up for my daughter specifically because I didn't understand what it was like to have a mother-daughter relationship. So that's where my healing began. But what I realized through it all was my DNA. And I always preference this because we all know what DNA is. But most times, what we think about when we think about DNA, we think about our biological DNA. But I want to stop and talk about my DNA, which is my determination and ambition. My determination and my ambition is what has allowed me to walk the life of losing parents. My determination and my ambition has been my building block, has been my foundation to know that no matter what I face, no matter what I go through, as long as I do not give up, my determination and my ambition biologically and emotionally and spiritually will allow me to continue to heal even when I'm grieving. And so that's when I took a spin to become an entrepreneur and began to brand clothing items that allows other people that if they were to put on my clothing items, that they would tell their story of what is their determination and ambition, what is their DNA, because everybody's story is different. And so that's sort of who I am. From that, as it was stated early on in my bio, I am a motivational speaker. I understand that people want to tell their story. Sometimes they don't know how. Sometimes they don't have the platform to do that. Sometimes they don't have the strength to do that. Some days I don't. But I have become a certified life coach. I've become a certified grief coach. I now have my own podcast to where I allow people to come, as you all have allowed me to come, to tell their raw, uncut story. So that's who.
Wow, Keisha, thank you so much for sharing that, for being so open and vulnerable to us. And, like really, really just showing up as you. You're the real, raw Keisha and showing the emotion. And I know that it's not easy and it doesn't matter how many years go by, but it's still that pain is still there. And it's something that is so real for us. And just listening to your story and listening to how you've taken something that is so sad and devastating and full of grief, and how you've managed to turn that around and to help other people to go through and to find that determination again and get that ambition back into their lives and start building their lives again. It's so commendable, and it really does remind me of the story of Mo Goddard. And I'm not sure if you've read any of his books or you've heard of him.
No, I
But
have
Mo
not.
Goddard was a business executive former business executive at Google X, and he was an engineer. And he's now also a motivational speaker and trending, I think, quite well. This thing, I'll put his details in the chat, and maybe have go through some of his podcasts, go through some of the videos. But you would resonate quite a bit with what his story was, and his story was that he had lost his son Ali at the age of, I think he was 21, and when he went in for an appendix operation, and it just suddenly went wrong. And he speaks about how his world just ended and how he was overcome and distraught with grief at the loss, and how his daughter came to him one day, a few days after the funeral, and related that his son had shared with her that he had had this dream, and in this dream he was everywhere and he was everything, and it was a turning point for him where he found meaning in that, and he decided that that was the message. And through the loss, as devastating as it is, that loss was there, and Ali's purpose in his life was for Mo to find his purpose. And in doing that, he decided that he was going to find this happiness equation and he was going to share this with 10 million people. And he's gone way beyond that 10 million now. And he's gone into, I think, his next goal is to reach 1 billion people or whatever it is. But the happiness equation, as explained in the book, is that happiness is greater than or equal to your perception of life minus your expectations.
Yes.
And we all have these expectations in life. We expect to grow, or we expect to be there, and for our children to bury us, and not for that to be the other way around. But
Right.
sometimes that's not what our lesson is meant to be. And your story just reminds me so much about that. And also just resonates with me about your own journey of finding that happiness and equating that into the many lives that you touch around your immediate space, but also through the clothing that you have and the meaning that that has, and how it extends to people way beyond your immediate circle. So I just wanted to share that with you, and hope that you can read his book. It's called Solve for Happy:
Okay, I will look.
Engineering Your Path to Joy. And I think that there's so many similarities. I think that you would appreciate, and
Thank you.
maybe it will be something to help you um, ease some of the pain that you're feeling.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things I also forgot to mention in reference to after losing my son, writing my book, I also started my own business, as I stated, entrepreneur. So much of what I've talked about in regards to my book and my clothing line, excuse me, is that I started my business called Turning Sorrow into Service, because I understand that, again, as you stated, some things are just out of our control, right? Some things, I mean, no parent wants to bury their child. You're exactly right. But I have, right? That is my reality. Is it an easy reality? Absolutely not. But what I realize is this: I can't stay stuck there. Right. I can remember those things. I can reflect upon those things. I can show emotion, whether it's sadness or whether it's smiling, when I tell a good story about my son or any other loved one whom I may have lost. But I understood once again the importance of turning my sorrow into service. How do I allow my story? How do I allow my voice? How do I service other people to know that we're not alone in this struggle? We're not alone in this fight. As my story may not be the same with everyone else, I know that my story resonates with a mother. I know that my story resonates with a sibling. I know that my story resonates with a child who may be broken and feel like that I don't have parents, whether it's because my parents have died, whether it's because my parents are just not in my life, because they may not know how to show up as the parents that that child may need. I know that my story can resonate with someone else. And so, again, service is who I am. My DNA allows me to show up again, as Anissa said in the beginning, whether I got my hair, whether my hair is done, whether my clothes are ironed, or whether I'm in the nicest clothes I have. I'm going to always show up as Lakeisha, who has a story, who's ready to service other people. So I
Um,
again, it's actually turning sorrow into service.
I love that. And I captured it. As you can see, it's on the screen.
Thank you.
Um, I do want to just ask you again the name of your book. You
The
mentioned
name
it
of my
so quick.
Yes. So the name of my book is Through the Eye of a Cracked Soul. And I will give a little small overview of why I named it that, because I didn't really go much into my parents' story.
What was it called? The Eye of a Cracked Soul.
Through the Eye of a Cracked Soul.
Okay. Yeah.
So to go back a little bit, and I will openly talk about my parents' story. My parents wasn't murdered just by coincidence. Um, my parents was murdered because of their lifestyle. I was brought up in a life of addiction. Both my parents were addicted in the early 80s in Detroit, Michigan, is where we resided. So because of their life and their life choices is what caused their death. Um, So the word crack, it is not misspelled. My author didn't forget to add the ed. It's there for a reason. And the reason for that is because if one were to look at the cover of my book, that is actually me sitting in front of a fence. In 2000, early 2000s, I took a visit back to Detroit, Michigan. I actually went to my where my mother and I resided, which was directly across the street from my schoolyard, which is also where my mother was murdered at, was directly across the street while I was in school. I had no idea that my mother had been murdered. I had talked to my mom at least 3 hours before she had been murdered. But when I went back in the early 2000s, I went back to sort of take a look at my life. And I walked into the school where I was when I learned that my mother had been murdered. The school was no longer in existence with students, but it still was open. But I wanted to purposely walk across the street. But what I found was that the building was no longer there. It was just a fence. So I took a picture for my own memories. But what was ironic when I began to think of the title for my book was when I went back and reflected on that picture, there was a crack in the ground. The crack is where my apartment building stood. Crack is ultimately what took the life of my mother. Yes, someone murdered her, but it was because of her life choices. She was addicted to drugs. And so again, it's a play on word for the title of my book, Through the Eye of a Cracked Soul. So here I was as a crack adult. Well, let me say this. Here I was as an adult with a cracked heart, unhealed, looking through a fence that had a crack on the ground where my apartment stood, where I last spoke to my mother and where I last saw my mother. And so that's how the title of my book came about. And so in the book, again, I'm very open. I'm very raw about my life as a young child, everything I went through. And so that's my story. That's my book, and I'll sort of leave it there.
You know, Lakeisha, there's so many parallels in our story, and as you speak, I look at you and myself with admiration, because we could have been a statistic. We could have become what we were raised, a product of what we were raised in.
You're right.
And yet God divinely chose our paths to go into a different direction. Yes, insurmountable grief. And yes, there are times that, you know, my mother wound or my father wound shows up. And I have to make sense of it. Why am I showing up in that way in that particular moment in time? But I just want to say that you are one powerhouse of a woman that's sitting here in front of us today, that is willing to just go as raw as you are and share this testimony, because our stories don't belong to us. And I think you said something similar. It's not our stories. We were chosen for these stories to be shared. And I absolutely love the title of the book. I want to see the image. I'm intrigued to know more. And I really do think that this story is the girl next door story, potentially, that we don't even know. The person we work with that wears the superficial mask of having it all together. You know, the sibling, we spoke last week, I think, on the segment where the sibling who doesn't know what their identity even is, and then they turn to drugs because they're grieving something in some shape or form. So the fact that you have not really known where you belong, that sense of belonging lacking in your life from that early age, and now cultivating belonging for others, is just inspiring to be a part of. And I'm really grateful that our paths have crossed, because every person's story, you can relate to parts of it as if it were your own. So I'm not necessarily relating to all parts, but yeah, I know what it is to grow up in rife drug drug environments where people are addicted, with the prostitution, um, gangsterism, so crime being quite rife. And
Mhm.
when we look at that, we ask ourselves, why me?
Yeah.
And on that note, I do want to read some of the comments that came through for you.
Okay, thank you.
Um, Ashif from Canada, who's always joining us, he says, hello, showing up authentically is part of the hero's journey. I think here he was talking, just responding to your comment around hurt people, but also broken people, save broken people. And how true is that?
Yes.
Somebody on Instagram, I never know the person's name, but nonetheless, they say that the divine never gives you more than you can endure. Ask the question, why is this coming to me? And I think you've discovered that answer already through many of these questions for
Yes.
yourself. Oh Natural says, my mother passed at 11, but it was meant to be, as my second mother was also an amazing woman, a teacher who taught me so much. So, I mean, I'm just in awe because you have taken the pain and really turned it into purpose.
Thank you.
It's like you said, turned your sorrow into service.
Yes.
What's next on this journey for you? Because this grief and this story, I mean, yes, you're a life coach, yes, you've written a book, but what is next for you in serving an even greater community than you are now through your podcast, through your coaching? How can you reach a whole lot more people, do you feel?
So I, as always, I'm going to be very transparent. I live life day to day. All right. I don't make many plans. I let life show me what it is I'm supposed to be doing. I let my higher power guide me on what is next. So what I'm going to put in the air is that I will continue to uplift other people. I will continue to show up for people when they feel like that no one else is showing up for them. I will continue to use my voice to be an inspiration for those that are low and sometimes those that are high. um I will continue to be who I am because I don't know how to be anyone else. I will continue to show my authentic self. I will continue to utilize my DNA to get me day to day on where it is I need to be. So my hope with that, my prayer to that is that my podcast will continue to be a space for people to come and speak and tell their truth. My ability to be a life coach and a grief coach is to be able to be there for people again when they just feel like that they're by themselves. And I say that to say it's not for me to help them, but it's for the collectives to be able to come together to provide a supportive system for people when they feel like they can't go anywhere else.
Lisa, I'd just like to also share that, we all go through different types of experiences and challenges and grief, and we all uh, deal with grief differently. But one thing about this platform and what it's taught me over this last year is to 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 value the experiences of other people, because in that it just gives you this renewed energy and a fight to want to be able to do better and to be better, because you see the experiences of other men and women around you, and whilst you're in your own experience you think you're going through the most. Why is it me? Why me? Why is it always me? Until you start to learn and listen to stories like yours, Lakeisha, and you take your hat off, because there's so much that you've gone through. There's so many terrible experiences, tragic experiences that you've had in your life, and look at what you've done with it. Not only have you taken this pain and turned it into your purpose, but it shows the power that you have within yourself. And it truly is inspiring and motivating, because through this, it allows me to say to myself, get up, dust yourself off, and do your very best, because you have the ability to do it. Because strong, wonderful, motivated women like yourself are showing us that we have that ability within us. So I just want you to carry that with you, that this is what you are inspiring, this is what you are mirroring, and this is what you are sharing, not just to myself and Anissa, but to so many people out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, I feel like I can continue talking to you for long, Keisha, but in our remaining precious 7 minutes that we have left, what would be your, I would say, your golden nuggets you want to share with those out there that are just feel that there is no hope, that they're sitting in that darkness. They don't know how to rise above it. They don't know how to get out of the suffering, the sorrow, the deep sorrow that they're feeling. Some that are really projecting out into the world and blaming everyone, that does not know how to extend empathy, compassion, or grace to others, never mind themselves in these moments.
Mhm.
What are possible ways that you've come through this, through your darkest periods, that you're willing to share as guidelines and support for others?
I think the first thing that I had to do that was very important is that I had to forgive. Right. Um, Forgiveness is powerful, but it's tough, right? Because it leave you, sometimes it can leave you an illusion that when you forgive someone that you're going to forget about everything that happened. That's not true, right? The forgiveness allows you to have space in your heart, to have space in your mind, to have space in your space to begin to heal, because that's what it takes, right? It takes you to truly look and say, I am not at fault for things that have happened to me, but in that, I'm going to give someone else grace for what they may have done to me, because sometimes we don't know other people's stories. Sometimes we don't know why people do the things they do. And I'm not giving people um kudos, or I'm not applauding people for some of the things they have done to other people. What I'm saying is sometimes we don't know everybody's story, and sometimes people regurgitate and give the energy that may have been given to them because they don't know any better. And so forgiveness is what I've had to do in every aspect of my life. Even when I may have been angry that my parents were no longer here, I have to forgive those who felt the need to take my parents away from me. Um, but also through this, I had to be honest with myself. Do I want to continue to feel this way? I don't. Do I deserve to feel better? I do. Do I deserve to find people whom I can talk to that's going to be honest with me and give me my stuff that I need to fix, the characteristic flaws that I may have because I'm holding on to the negative things that have happened to me that ultimately may have not been my fault, but it showed up in my life, right? And so if there's anything that I can share with someone that's listening today, give yourself grace. Be patient with yourself. Grief is not easy. There's no timeline for when it's going to be over. But while you're dealing with it, be patient with yourself. While you're healing, be patient with yourself. But overall, just please forgive. I understand it's not easy, but when I'm asked, what did I do to get to where I am? Honestly, I had to forgive. I had to forgive. And I believe that whomever your higher power may be, that's what we're all asked to do, is to give someone grace, even when we may be hurting through the trials and tribulations that we may have faced, because we want someone to give us grace.
I'm sitting here listening to that, and we have to extend that to ourselves first, only to then know how to do it for others. I find that you're never going to cross the threshold of giving others grace or even being in that space of gratitude if you've not done the work yourself. And the forgiveness is paramount to all of that. A forgiveness of self. I know you teared up in the beginning of not being the mother to your daughter in the way that she needed. And we all have those guilt moments every now and then. I still have these conversations now. Having done lots of self-development work, I still have to feel like, yikes, but I could have dealt with that a little bit differently.
Mhm.
And so I'm mindful that we have this spiritual ego that can sometimes play a role where we don't give ourselves grace, because in our mind and in our hearts, we've done the work, we're serving others. And so it's very important to be mindful when we think we always have to have it all together, when there are times that we're not going to have it together, and
Right.
that's okay too, you know. So I want to thank you
Thank you.
for all that you brought here today, your amazing, incredible story. I feel like a book that I need to get is your book, because I may get inspired to finish my book that's on the radar and just leaving it there. And your provocative title tells me that it's going to evoke quite a lot more when you actually get to read this book.
But
So,
thank you.
congratulations on taking that step as well. Congratulations on launching your podcast. And with the absolute pleasure, I would love to be on yours, as you asked me before we came on.
Thank
And I
you.
suppose Jamila, I'm sure she's going to extend that invitation to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I so again, I want to thank you all for allowing me to have this space, but let me more so tell you why I'm thankful. Beyond just sharing my story, as we know, and I will say this as a therapist myself, being able to talk through what you're going through allows you more space in your life to heal. As I didn't realize I was going to cry today, and I've been on numerous of podcasts before, and I talk openly about my grief quite often. I cried more today than probably what I have in a while on each subject matter. As I didn't realize I needed this today. I needed this today. I know everything happens in life for that person's, for a reason for that person. I didn't realize this was my purpose today. I didn't realize that this was the reason today. But thank you. I don't want to just say thank you for allowing me to be a guest. Thank you for allowing me to address a part of my grief that maybe I wasn't dealing with. So thank you all for
Oh,
coming into my life today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and again for being so vulnerable and sharing so sincerely with us, because I'm sure that it's going to help so many of us. And just on your point of being graceful with ourselves, we're all doing the best that we can with the knowledge that we have and the tools that we have at this particular time. So I echo your words on that. We should always be kind to ourselves and keep working on what we can do better. But it's been an absolute pleasure listening to your story and having you on, and can't wait to read your book.
Thank you. You all have a great day as well. And thank you to those that have allowed me to share my story and listen to my story.
so we are going to end our live, but if you wouldn't mind staying on for just another minute when we end the live, just for a short debrief and further acknowledgements. Thank you
Definitely.
again. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, frazzled, bedazzled, whatever way we're going to show up as. And thank you for just being in this space with us always. And for those that are regular, we really value your contributions always. And for those that are going to listen to the replay, do reach out to Lakeisha on that DNA method. I think it's very powerful, thought provoking, and it will evoke quite a bit for you as well. On that note, let me end.